So there was a Time magazine piece. Nobody believes in our victory like I do. Nobody, says Zelensky, and it was by Simon Schuster. Redacted did a video about this the other day. Redacted is not very friendly or sympathetic to Zelensky or Ukraine, and I'm going to review what they had to say. Their title was Zelensky is delusional and everyone knows it in Ukraine. And that's kind of bouncing off of what was being said in this article. Now, Georgie from Ukraine Matters also talked about this, and he calls it garbage, debunking Time's hit piece. He wasn't talking about what was going on in Redacted, but I'm going to go through Redacted, and I'm going to stop and pause and explain where they're right or where they're wrong, mostly wrong, and I want you to stay with me because you can learn a lot about why you should only listen to one source, why doing that is very dangerous. And if anybody tells you just listen to one source or just one side, you probably need to rethink that. All right, so here we go. We're going to start listening to Redacted. By the way, as I go through this, I'm saying, just for clarity, this is not just taking their work. I'm adding to it, I'm changing it, I'm modifying it by reviewing what's going on, stopping and pausing, and critiquing what's going on.
Let's talk about Ukraine now. Since all of the headlines are about Israel these days, Vladimir Zelensky is apparently getting very desperate up there in Ukraine. Now, according to...
Stop. Okay, that's his assumption that Zelensky's getting desperate. No, it's a pretty fair thought that he's having problems and he wishes things were going a different direction, but this is setting the tone for everything he's doing. Let's keep going.
A damning new article out this week from Time magazine.
Did you hear that chime? Every time he says Time, you're going to hear a chime because he gives Time magazine all the credit as if it's just Time, not the author who's writing it. And so he's trying to get the credibility of Time magazine that said this. Time magazine thinks that. Time magazine. Just listen to every time he says Time, you're going to hear this chime. Okay, so here we go.
Time magazine's words. According to Time magazine, here's the front cover of this. Nobody believes in our victory like I do. Nobody. And according to Time magazine, U.S. money is drying up. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed in NATO's war.
Did Time really say that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians were dying in NATO's war? Here is a line from the article, but according to the U.S. and European estimates, the total has long surpassed 100,000 on each side of the war. That's not the same as saying hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have died. But again, you're not going to get a fair shake from him because he's incredibly biased toward Ukraine.
The war is over, according to Time magazine.
No, the war is not over, according to Time magazine either. If you want, I'll do an entire review of that article because I've read the whole article. And while it was slanted, while it was biased, there were facts in there that could be twisted, and I think the author knew what he was doing in this by it was going to be a sensational article because of the way it was written, and you'll see what we're talking about.
And apparently everyone knows this, says Time magazine. Everyone but Vladimir Zelensky knows this. In fact, Time magazine paints Zelensky as delusional. We'll get to that part.
Well, Time doesn't paint him as a delusional. A unidentified source who the author selected and doesn't say who it is paints him as delusional, but not Time.
Story in a moment, but first we should point out that Time magazine has an incredibly cozy relationship with the CIA. In fact,
okay, now this is why this is important that he keeps saying Time magazine, Time magazine, Time magazine, because Time magazine has this cozy relationship with the CIA, and so it's really the CIA saying all these things is where he's going to go. Watch this. This is fascinating.
Well documented. Even going back to the 1970s when the New York Times blew the roof off the dump and an investigation showed it. All you need to do is even go to CIA's own website, even talks about how Time planted stories given to them by the CIA. The Cato Institute did a deep dive on this, showing that the New York Times, CBS, and Time magazine have the three closest relationships to the intelligence community of any of the major newspapers and reporting agencies out there.
F. That means nothing. You failed. That is irrelevant unless this particular author was getting something from the CIA. Does that make sense? Like, this does not have anything to do with what has happened historically in the past unless it does. And we don't know that it does, but he's connecting these dots as if those dots are meant to be connected.
Taking money and direction from the CIA is Time magazine. So when you see a damning cover story about Zelenskyy in the CIA magazine,
a CIA magazine. See how Time is crossed over from Time, the authority of Time magazine saying these things, as opposed to the author in the article of Time magazine, all the way now to the CIA is saying that Zelenskyy is X, Y, and Z, right? I mean, that's where he went.
I mean, Time magazine. It should raise some eyebrows. Why is the CIA-backed Time magazine now painting this really grim picture of Ukraine?
And now he's saying the CIA is painting this grim picture of Ukraine. That's not a leap that you can logically take.
Is it to garner support, or is it to lay the groundwork for something more nefarious, which we'll get to? So Time magazine was granted unbelievable access to Zelenskyy's inner circle of advisors and aides, people close to him, and supporters for this article, support in this article. And it shows an unhinged leader that is out of touch with reality. Again, this is Time magazine saying.
Okay, how many times are you going to say Time magazine? Okay, now, what I want you to understand is this is how, a part of how propaganda works. It works the same way with American media that's slanted, and Time magazine is American media that is slanted a little bit to the left, generally speaking. But this particular article cut against Zelenskyy. But he's taking this somewhat slanted piece and then he's amplifying it here. And so you see the same kind of dynamics if there's Russian propaganda that somebody will then go and amplify as well. But he's just amplifying and taking just the worst aspects of it. Like, he's not focusing on the good things that are in here at all. I read the entire article, so I know what I'm talking about. So it's a really a cautionary tale to just, if you just listen to him, you get almost a funhouse mirror effect in your view of what's going on.
So why is Time magazine painting a damning picture of Zelenskyy? It's a good question, actually, because former member of the CIA, Larry Johnson, told me recently that he believes that the CIA is positioning Zelenskyy to be taken out. Listen.
The West.
Okay, so he's interviewing a former member of the CIA. Go Google or look up in Wikipedia Larry Johnson, CIA, and see what this guy's predilections are about Zelenskyy in Ukraine, and you'll find what I said, and you go, oh, well, that explains why this guy's here.
Has been praising Zelenskyy as the new Winston Churchill, which just goes to underscore the level of delusion that has possessed the West. But now you're getting in all quarters, in Washington and London, Germany, and throughout the rest of NATO, these recriminations being expressed about Ukraine's failure to press the counteroffensive, failure to listen to the advice of the West, that they're always begging for more. So this is starting to become a more common thing. So I think the next natural step, whether the CIA does it or the CIA encourages somebody to do it, I don't think Zelensky's long for the world. He's not the kind of guy that I think is going to be allowed to go off into exile where he'll be sunning himself down in Miami Beach.
So off.
Okay, so that is the CIA analyst, a former CIA guy. But if you look at his biography, you'll find that that former CIA guy has been involved in all kinds of conspiracy theories and will not support pretty much anything about Ukraine or Zelenskyy or anything anyway. So he's already fairly biased on that side. Okay, he can have his opinion, and that's fair that he can have his opinion, but you just have to understand what's going on here. It's not that the CIA is actually saying this in Time magazine. It's not that at all.
Killed, assassinated by these intelligence operatives.
And then he's running with it saying he's going to be killed or assassinated.
Seems like they're laying the groundwork for that. As someone in the chat just says, someone in the chat just says, Comajor says the CIA used Zelenskyy and is now throwing him out in the trash. Now,
So that's a repeater of a repeater of a repeater, the person in the chat. I mean, that's it's pretty bizarre to watch.
that's exactly what it appears like. Time magazine says, quote, Zelensky feels betrayed by his own Western allies. His belief in Ukraine's ultimate victory over Russia worries some of his advisors. He deludes himself, a close aide says. We're out of options. We're not winning. But try telling him that. It's over. Ouch.
Okay, so you could read that one of two ways. You can read, and there's other language that talks about a very similar kind of thing in that article, that, yeah, Zelensky's got a will of iron and he's going to keep fighting. Or you can read that as, he's just nuts. And they're going to read it as, he's just nuts.
So delusional. Delusional, they say.
Like, what your first clue should have been when they kept denying you entry into NATO. Like, that should have been your first clue that you just
Has nothing to do with
a long-term play.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, historically, the first clue should have been you're dealing with the U.S. Like that right there should give you pause. Like,
That's interesting, because this is the way that these guys tend to operate, is they tend to have a really jaded view toward the United States as well.
you know what you're getting into there.
Well, historically, when Victoria Nuland comes to town,
Here we go.
That should have been
Victoria
your first
Nuland.
spooky alarm bell going off that maybe this isn't going to be up to par. Using, creepy Victoria Nuland, warmongering Victoria Nuland, coup causing Victoria Nuland. That should have been your first alarm bells.
Now, notice that I talk about him and I say he's biased, but I don't call him cuckoo. But when they call people names, that's usually a sign that something's not right. Like, you don't need to call your adversary a bad name. You say, look, here are the facts. This is what he's done. But you don't have to say creepy, cuckoo, whatever.
But they got in bed with the wrong person. Can you imagine being in bed with Victoria Nuland?
Again, you don't need to do that.
I hope you mean figuratively, because
That'll creep you out.
Thank you for that image. Thank you.
Hey, it's Halloween. I have to give you some creepy images of that. So he's delusional, according to Time magazine.
Again, according to Time magazine. Okay, I can't wait any longer. We have to go look at this. So, according to Time magazine, but it's actually according to Simon Schuster. Now, who is Simon Schuster? So, if you look up Simon Schuster in Time magazine, you'll find this is the guy that wrote the article, and he wrote a lot about Zelensky. Volodymyr Zelensky struggled to keep Ukraine in the fight. Ukraine fears Russia's mines at nuke plants, and goes on and on. A little bit about Putin. Russian general may gain from Wagner's mutiny inside Zelensky's battle. Hey, he wrote this other piece over here, right, where he's Times Man of the Year and other things. Like, so it's interesting. He wrote a lot, and I just looked through this. But Georgie dug a little bit deeper. Georgie from Ukraine Matters. By the way, if you want to watch an excellent channel that covers a lot comprehensively about what's going on in Ukraine, Ukraine Matters does an awesome job. Here's Georgie looking a little bit deeper into Simon Schuster's background.
Because some of his earlier articles that he wrote were extremely weird. Since 2014 especially, he wrote about a lot of things, like, for example, that Azov are Nazis, which they're not. He wrote about Eastern Ukrainians really wanting Russian forces to invade and would almost inevitably greet everyone with flowers, which we saw in reality didn't happen. He was writing that arming Ukraine would be an absolute devastation, that Ukraine just needs to bend over, and, well, you know what would happen with a bend over Ukraine. So this person has a history of certain narratives within him. Potentially, we should give him a benefit of the doubt and then say, maybe that's what something...
And look, that's very fair, okay? Look what he's written, see what his predilections are, and then we'll listen to him with the benefit of the doubt, knowing that he could be going that direction.
He was thinking there, but it's important to know the history of where he's coming from, especially now that we're getting used to the war in Ukraine and we're getting used to Ukraine not being a headline in the news and there is just one correct version, but rather there are deep enough penetrations by the Russian propaganda for any kind of different opinions to seep in through and feed on the popularity of those pro-Russian narratives. An interesting again thing about Simon Schuster, the author of this article, is that he was actually publicly stating many times, and this is not a quote because I'm translating from Russian because he's a fluent Russian speaker, is that he was saying in direct words that his endless love for Russia will never cease. That is his words, not
Okay,
mine.
hold on a second. If that's the guy that is writing about Zelensky and writing these things, you now need to take whatever he said with a grain of salt. And what's important about that is that if he's saying that and he's the author, it's Simon Schuster saying these things, not Time Magazine, not the CIA. And you got to clarify that, or you're going to have a funhouse mirror effect about how you're seeing the world. Okay, back to Redacted.
They can choose what they print, and they chose to print that his closest aides are calling Zelensky delusional. They printed that. So according to Time Magazine, this is the same...
According to Simon Schuster, not according to Time Magazine.
Time Magazine, by the way, that named him as Person of the Year.
Mm-hmm.
The spirit of Ukraine. Person of the Year. Among other cover stories. How many cover stories have they given the guy? How Zelensky leads. Do you remember this effusive, loving story about how he leads his country? And
I
how
do
he's going to
remember
lead
that.
his country to victory? I guess something changed
and those
over
were some
there.
beautiful pictures they got in his bunker. You know, those really nice photo shoots they had down there with his wife. And it was just very beautiful setup. And they really tried to, you know,
They lit it
paint him as
well.
this.
Beautiful cameras. It was like very soft lighting. They made it look really, you know, really beautiful.
And the music score was beautiful.
The score. It's a magazine. There's no music. So I guess something changed over there at the CIA magazine.
At the CIA magazine. It's not even Time Magazine. You see how he went from here to here to here, and now he's talking about here? The CIA magazine, not Time, not Simon Schuster.
Time also reported that Zelensky's top advisors admit the truth about corruption in Ukraine, saying people are stealing like there's no tomorrow. People at the highest level of Ukraine's government are lining their pockets with cash, according to Time Magazine, as taxpayers prepare to fund yet another year of that nation's war against Russia. An advisor...
Now, this is a Russian talking point that's being imported here that is being amplified or accelerated by what was in the article. Okay, let's talk about his advisor in just a moment. But
Ukrainian President Zelensky said. Time Magazine published a lengthy story on Monday about reporter Simon Schuster's recent visit there to war-torn country. And he says, wow, the morale of these leading Ukraine nearly 2 years is, you know, it's unbelievable. The insights into the morale of these leading Ukraine. According to an unnamed senior advisor to Zelensky, people at the top are stealing like there's no tomorrow. So how, as Americans watching this right...
Okay, let's talk about this unnamed senior advisor to Zelensky. Because this is important now. Now we really need to start thinking through some things. So the unnamed political advisor is someone that Georgie has talked about here. And I went and verified to make sure.
Postpone it any longer. Simon here refers again to some kind of aides that are again critical of Zelensky. And we were guessing who that is. Who is that person close to Zelensky that just is so against him? Again, no one that supports Zelensky is properly quoted here.
So this is the problem when you use unnamed sources as opposed to, like, if you said that Polyak said, Mikhail Polyak, he's one of the well-known people, you could say, oh, he's going to have this perspective or he's going to have that perspective. But if you have an unnamed guy, you don't know where he's coming from or what's going on. Okay, let's see what's going on.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet Alexei Arestovich.
Oh, now
if you know who it is, you know. If you don't know who it is, then I'll tell you. So Alexei Arestovich was one of many advisors in the office of the president. Not Zelensky's advisor, just one of the staffs. He's extremely populistic. He's a great speaker. He became really popular because at the start of the war, as he claimed himself, he came out to the public and just made outrageous numbers of how many Russian troops Ukrainians were destroying. On that hype and popularity wave, he got a lot of clout. So Alexei Arestovich since then has fallen to the deepest ends of anti-Zelensky propaganda.
Hmm.
He has been thrown out of the office because of his misappropriated claims about the Russian attacks on Ukraine.
Hmm.
Since then, he declared Zelensky, as you can read here, compared him to a dictator, Hitler, stuff like that. He is targeting the remnants of the pro-Russian population inside Ukraine for his campaign, because he openly declared that he's the one, by the way, that is pushing for elections in Ukraine to be held as soon as possible, and he is running on the "we need to be Russian" platform. He is picking up from those pro-Russian parties. The guy can have a lot of discussion about himself, but what I want you to take away from this, before you get really mad and try to read up about Arestovich and everything else, he's a nobody. He doesn't matter. He never did matter. His position was never that important. He's just a talker, a speaker. He's blabbering a lot. That's it. That's it. He has no real influence. Right now, he fled Ukraine. He is not even in Ukraine anymore. He's living in EU. Alexei Arestovich is a populist that is driving the hype, that is seeing his political career on a pro-Russian narrative. And
Okay,
this man
so let me finish.
is openly claiming that it was him that spoke with Simon Schuster on many, many occasions.
Okay, and so that's what I wanted him to get through, and then I went and verified that. Okay, last month Zelensky went to Washington. Simon Schuster says, and he says he had this unfettered access, and then we see this. Since I wrote this comment, this is John Sweeney. It has emerged that one of the anonymous sources for the Ukrainian end is Alexei Arestovich, former PR man for the Ukrainians, but before that, far-right actor and associate of Russian fascist Alexander Dugin. Now, this is Arestovich, he was actually fired after making some improper remarks about the Ukrainian presidential advisor. Now, again, someone that works in the office is called the advisor. Alexei Arestovich has offered his resignation after suggesting a Russian missile, which hit a building in Dnipro, killing 44 people, was shot down by Kyiv. Mr. Arestovich apologized and said he made a fundamental error. The original remark caused widespread anger in the country and was used by Russian officials to blame Ukraine. That was back in January. Okay, so, and again, the Ukrainian officials so far said that 44 people died in Saturday strikes. That was what he was talking about. Okay, since then, he's become very embittered, and he's now, this is Zelensky's former advisor, Arestovich, to stand in future elections. So he's running for election against Zelensky. Now, in the Time magazine article, he's a source close to the president. He's really not. He's an antagonist, and it's like interviewing Hillary to speak about Trump or Trump to speak about Hillary. It's just not going to work out very well.
And, members of the Europe who've sent him money as well. You got to think about all of that corruption. How does it feel to know that Americans are struggling to pay their bills, but you're sending taxpayer dollars to Ukraine, and then these corrupt politicians in Zelensky's inner circle are just lining their pockets with it?
And this is the standard Russian talking point narrative that he's projecting right now, like that they're all corrupt and right. Okay,
sorts of luxury villas and houses and cars and boats.
Amplify that message.
And the United States is itching to send more money, perhaps. We'll see. And also, Time reports, Time's not done. Time really dumped a whole load on this guy, and it's unbelievable. They're also reporting that Zelensky...
It kind of is unbelievable, but let's just say, it's not Time, it's not the CIA, it's the author using, for a lot of his quotes, an unnamed source who happens to be one of Zelensky's greatest antagonists. Like, this is a journalistic hit piece. I mean, it really is. Now, there's a lot of good things in there as well that I see, like Zelensky's got an iron will. He's standing strong, even though he feels embattled, and he should be. But at the same time, this was just written in such a way that someone like him could go and do exactly what he's doing. And it's being communicated, 121,000 views in one day. And it's just going to spread that narrative.
He is about to fire the guys in charge of the failed counteroffensive. So Time's admitting that it's been a disaster, and they're admitting that guys are about to be fired. Claims that Ukrainian authorities are preparing to dismiss a minister and a general in charge of the counteroffensive. So desperate people do desperate things, and I'm worried that Zelensky is going to do something desperate in Ukraine. We've already seen attacks increasing on residential areas in Donetsk over the past 24 hours. Early this morning, bombs hit apartment buildings there in what was formerly eastern Ukraine, is now Russian-controlled and officially voted to become part of Russia. So Russia considers it Russian territory. Those were bombed again overnight. Even Zelensky's admitting that, yes, in fact, they've been using American weapons to attack Crimea, as we covered in the newsletter today,
yes,
which
and that's
is, of course, a violation of what President...
That's not a violation of anything. Crimea is not Russia. That is free game.
President Biden said you're not allowed to do that.
Nope,
Use
it's
American
not.
weapons.
He's not being accurate. Biden is perfectly fine with them attacking in Crimea, not attacking in Russia proper. Crimea is not Russia.
To attack Crimea? That doesn't matter. They're doing it anyway. So what do you think is going to happen? You know, they're fading from the headlines. The House of Representatives doesn't want to send Ukraine money. Time magazine has Zelensky on the front cover in this disastrous piece about his corruption. He's delusional. We'll have to see. What do you guys think is going to happen? Let us know in the comments below. What is up next for Zelensky? What is the next stage? Are we about to see some big desperate move on the part of Ukraine? Launching some sort of crazy false flag attack?
Oh, there it is. False flag.
I mean, hey, what rattled the cages for the world to certainly turn all cameras and media attention towards Israel was a terror attack by Hamas in Israel.
Okay, I'm stopping there where he's saying that that they might even do a terrorist attack like they did in Israel. Come on. Okay, so if you've taken nothing away from this, hopefully the scales have fallen from your eyes and you can see the way that they take these logical leaps that they shouldn't be able to take. Using Time magazine as the foil to say, Time magazine said this, it must be true. And in fact, it's a CIA. It's CIA magazine. No, it's not. It's not. It's about this particular author. His name is Simon Schuster, who has a predilection one direction, who's then using a source that it also has a predilection that direction. Tell me what you think about this below. And if you want me to go through line by line through that Time magazine article, I'll do it if you demand it. Just let me know if that's something that you want. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.